and that every small business has the opportunity and the platform to flourish, and that every human being has an opportunity to earn an income. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights sets out, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So that is the starting point. But as we know, for many human beings, they start from that point and then their dignity is eroded until the world has a very serious problem on its hands. How then do we secure dignity? A key part of securing dignity is access to information, which will enable citizens to take ownership of their own livelihoods and accountability. One of the schemes that we at the Wellbeing Foundation are looking to implement, on top of our personal health record, which allows women to know their health rights and thus reach out for them, is the birth preparedness scheme, in which women can save for the birth of their child, and then this same account can follow the child and act as a saving scheme for the child's immunizations and later education. Tonight's panel will focus on the Middle East and North Africa, a region whose citizens yearn for dignity in the face of political instability and violent conflict. While the lack of human dignity is a challenge for this region, this challenge is not limited to the Middle East and Northern Africa. Political instability and violent conflict are still a major challenge across the globe, and these tend to affect women and children much more adversely than any other sectors of population. In my own home country of Nigeria, there have been a spate of attacks, including a recent attack where a large number of schoolgirls were kidnapped from a school at Chibok in northern Nigeria. They still have not been found. This is why it is important to bring the issues surrounding universal dignity to global attention. It is a challenge that faces us all and something that philanthropy can help to mediate. What gives us hope is that the people's strong desire for political freedom, economic opportunity, and gender equity is what keeps us going, gets us out of bed every day, and allows us to try again. We have heard the voices of the MENA region, and we have heard the voices of other regions. This is a moment of opportunity to push for inclusive development, and this is one opportunity that all of us should work to take advantage of. Now, I would like to introduce the moderator of the next plenary. Barbara Lethem Ibrahim is the founding director of the John D. Gerhart Center for Philanthropy and Civic Engagement, established in 2006 at the American University of Cairo. Previously, Barbara served as regional director for West Asia and North Africa of the Population Council, and as program officer for urban poverty at the Ford Foundation. Barbara herself is a global migrant. Born and educated in the United States, she studied in Beirut, Lebanon, and moved to Egypt with her husband, where she has lived and worked since 1975. Barbara.
That's my panelists to join us. Oh, those are comfortable chairs. It's wonderful to be back at the Global Philanthropy Forum. My husband and I joined you 2 years ago for a panel on Egypt. It was, in fact, a much more hopeful time. We brought with us Bassem Youssef, who is known as Egypt's Jon Stewart. As a result of meeting with some of you and going to New York and seeing Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, he moved his program from being a taped show to being a live weekly program. He's now had the dubious honor of being closed down by 3 different satellite channels. He is currently unable to perform until Egypt passes through its next presidential election. But tonight, we come back to broaden out the discussion and to look at the MENA region more broadly. I think that the headlines would lead you to believe that the entire region is embroiled in violent conflict or contested and messy transitions. But the fact of the matter is that beyond a handful of countries that are facing the kind of strife and difficulties that we all know are part of transitions everywhere in the world. In the broader MENA region, countries like Morocco, Jordan, Lebanon, many of the Gulf countries are engaged in a very fertile process of innovation and change, much of it driven by its younger generation who have a vision of a better Middle East that they are determined to see in their lifetimes. So I think our panel is here tonight to talk to you about some of the opportunities to participate with those innovators, those young visionaries, to make sure that this opening and this opportunity in the region is not lost. Because dignity is the theme of tonight's session, I did a little bit of internet research, and the origin of the word is interesting. It comes from the Latin root, which means worth. And if you think about what happened in Tunisia and Egypt and elsewhere in the region, it was about a tipping point being reached when governments became so smug and so insular and so concerned with their own benefit that they forgot to acknowledge the worth of their citizens. They closed the doors of opportunity. And so some of our countries are struggling to rebuild states and institutions that reestablish dignity for their people. Beyond that, and tonight we're going to hear from two such innovators and thought leaders in the region, there's an incredible opportunity. Young Arabs are returning from Europe and from North America to be part of the change that's taking place in their region. It's not a transition that the region can undertake by itself. And unlike in Eastern Europe or South Africa, where there was a very eager and intense participation from international partners, for a variety of reasons that have to do with economic recession, which the world was just returning from the political messiness of some of what happens in the region, there has not to date been that kind of international partnering, which we feel is essential if we're going to achieve the goals of human dignity that so many people have struggled for and some have died for in this region over the last 3 years. So I am really delighted to have with me this evening, not three, but two spokespersons. Myrna Atalla is the executive director of Alfanar. This is the region's first venture philanthropy foundation. Alfanar means lighthouse, and it really has been that kind, I think, of leader and pioneer in the region. And before that, she worked at the National Democratic Institute, working on programs on citizenship and related issues in Lebanon. Our other speaker is Usama Fayyad. We've just learned over dinner that we share many friends and acquaintances in common, but I'm meeting him for the first time. However, I know very well about his exciting initiative, Oasis 500, which is a regional initiative that aims initially to jumpstart 500 technology and internet startups that will change the face, we are sure, of the region. And each of them will speak tonight about the role that the concept of dignity plays in generating change in the region. Having grown up in this country and then spent my career actually entirely in the Middle East, I know that cultures have constituent themes or values that really guide how they think about themselves and how they think about what they aspire to for their children and for their futures. If Americans think of those values around individual freedom and around democracy, if Brits perhaps think of theirs around a kind of stoic resilience in the face of, and fortitude in the face of difficulty, in the Middle East, concepts of honor and of dignity are these kinds of mobilizing ideas that people are willing to fight and to die for, and that were expressed, I think, in the kind of longing that we heard in the music tonight, a longing to be appreciated, to be allotted that sort of human dignity that unfortunately has not always been given to them. I think I'd like to start this evening with Usama. He's currently based in Jordan after a very interesting career that included this part of the world, Microsoft, Yahoo. He has a son currently studying in Michigan and just came from a speaking engagement there. And Usama, I'd like for you to make those connections between human dignity, technology, and the potential that it holds for our region.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Barbara. Great to be here. So I'm going to get to Barbara's point, but first I wanted to give you a quick summary of what I would consider a very strange journey that I've been privileged to be part of in Jordan. And it started out right when I was exiting Yahoo, trying to make my way back to the Middle East for a second time, going there actually to invest. As a private investor, I wanted to invest in a bunch of startups, and I was very, very bullish, still am, on the region. And I got invited to this very strange meeting, very unusual, with the king and a few people from the private sector. And the king in Jordan asked a couple of very interesting questions, saying, we have a lot of graduates in information technology, probably highest in capita in the world, but we're not seeing, big companies like Yahoo and Google and sort of emerge out of this region. Why? And what can we do to change that? That actually started me on that journey to try to answer these questions, and sort of woke me up to a few things. When I started this journey, I really believed, philanthropy didn't have much to say about this. We didn't need it. It's really about investment funds. It's really about building companies. You don't need help. It's self-help. It's sustainable, etc. And I quickly was humbled, right? Because I started thinking, why do we have a Silicon Valley? Well, we have a Silicon Valley because there's a lot of great universities here. There's a lot of great industry here. People get to learn from experience. They learn what they need to do. So when they have the opportunity, when they get the funding, they sort of naturally know what to do. They have examples, they have peers, they have mentors. So I started asking questions. Well, how do you transform a region while preserving dignity? That's a big deal. But how do you transform an economy? And how do you change a culture, right? And I'm a believer that you change a culture through examples. So how do you start this engine? And this is where, in my own problem solving, I landed again to the point where, well, we actually do need philanthropy in a few key areas. Not in giving grants to people, not in getting them used to sort of being on the dole, which is something I've seen throughout the Middle East, especially in places like Palestine, where direct aid is actually more harmful than helpful in many, many cases, even though it's well-intended, because it gets the population used to really being lazy. But I found that what you need here is to trigger or to spark the system. You need to educate, you need to teach people what they need to do. If we're going to give them money, so it's possible to raise the funding, how do we make sure they know what to do with that money? Otherwise, if you give money to people who don't know what to do with it, it's like a hormonal injection, right? They get big for a few minutes and then they collapse. So it really bothered me that I could find a business model, because I'm a businessman by nature. I could find a business model for raising the funding. I could find a business model for the investments, the acceleration, all the pieces that we needed to do from scratch. But I couldn't find a business model for the education piece. And that's where we turned to getting financial aid from, initially from the local companies, Then actually the UK government, of all places, stepped up and said, we actually have funding to help Arab countries do the right thing, and we think this entrepreneurship training is right on, so we were going to fund your training. Then came the US saying, well, you're a US citizen, why are you taking money from the Brits? Let's give you more, which is all good. But now we're at a stage where we needed scale. World Bank stepped in and did a little bit, also very grateful for them. But now when you want to scale it, so our program is based on training people, putting them through a boot camp, and using that training period where we give them long-lasting life skills on how to build a business, how to build a business model, how to manage a business, etc. Very intensive. We use it also to select who do we fund. And right after the training, sort of the charitable side ends, right? We fund the training, but after that, it's a business. There's a fund, there's investors who invest because they expect to make money. And then we have an accelerator that actually helps these companies grow fast, attract further funding. We have networks of angel investors that help invest in them, and then later stage investors. We have mentors. And I must say, you probably hear a lot of bad news about the region. I have seen nothing but what I would consider miraculous developments there. The minute we set up something that was set up right, and it was done as a meritocracy, lots of amazing things happened. The demand from the entrepreneurs was way higher than we ever imagined. So it was about 5 times higher than we thought it would be. The demand from the investors was way higher than we thought. They were actually paying huge increases in valuation for these companies once they've been through the initial program. The mentors, which I thought would never work out in the Middle East, I'm a cynic. Boy, was I wrong. They actually signed up in droves. Each of our companies has at least 4 to some of them up to 14 mentors working with them, helping them avoid mistakes and so forth. And these are all business owners, local leaders, etc. So it's all been one pleasant surprise after the other, right? And the most pleasant one, maybe I'll leave for later in this discussion. But to me, the 2 big categories that have been miraculous are, one, unlocking the capital, meaning a lot of capital that people used to invest conservatively, meaning I'll buy a piece of land and I'll sell it after 2 years, and nothing good happens out of it other than the value goes up, into saying, you know what, I'll invest in technology companies and I'll make more money. And while I'm doing that, I'm creating jobs, I'm creating a whole new economy. And the other one is unlocking the human resources. So the big surprise was women. We didn't target necessarily women, right? It was truly set up as a meritocracy, so anybody who qualified. And what I've seen there in terms of women stepping up, perhaps because they don't have as many opportunities as they would have in a Western society, this was sort of one of the few outlets. So we got overrepresentation of women in our boot camps, but the big lesson to me was, once they were in the boot camp and they were going through the program, and we're sort of selecting who are we going to invest in, women were twice as successful as their peers, male peers, in actually getting the funding, and then subsequently in actually growing the company and managing it and attracting follow-on funding and so forth, which has been really amazing to me. It's sort of, it's not a surprise because, essentially those are societies where half the workforce is really marginalized. And here, as soon as you gave them a real outlet, they really, shined or shone. So those have been really, positive stories I want to share with you, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the details of this. But my belief, my theme for you is entrepreneurship is sort of, in my opinion, a great new frontier, especially in the emerging markets, in the developing world, for philanthropy. That's how you make, those funds work much harder, much more effectively, and probably much more sustainably, and I'm sure Myrna is going to elaborate on that part of it. And most importantly, by preserving and creating dignity for these people who are used to just being sort of either government employees or employees of very, very large companies that are fairly oppressive, to actually go out on their own and start creating their own businesses, become bosses, hire other people, and really walk with pride and feel like they're catching up to the rest of the world with the technology revolution. So.
Usama, thank you very much. Yeah, that deserves applause.
Thank you.
It is very exciting to see this new generation of young entrepreneurs taking their own and not just solving business problems, but also addressing social problems at the same time. One of the concerns about the entrepreneurship model or path is that it may neglect some of the most marginalized in societies who just haven't had the opportunity to get to that level. And I know that Myrna, through Alfanar, thinks about these marginalized groups a lot, and I think it would be really interesting as a complement to what we've just heard to hear about your model and how you think Alfanar's work is addressing dignity in the region.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Usama. Thank you, Jane, and the Global Philanthropy Forum for having us this evening to share our insights from the Arab region. The topic is vast and highly apropos, and I'll just return a little bit to the issue of dignity and how it plays a role in inclusive, sustainable development. The yearning for karami, or dignity in Arabic, was the rallying cry that brought millions of people into the street to protest corruption, nepotism, marginalization, lack of economic opportunity, and in 2011, it overtook Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Syria, and others, and was probably the word of the year. But karami has a wider import than just a call to revolution. It is a way of living, an aspiration for people in the Arab region, and it is central to Alfanar's investment approach, and I would argue should be central to philanthropic strategy in general. In preparing my notes for tonight, I asked our teams in Egypt, Lebanon, and Libya, as well as our 9 incredibly courageous investees, the civil society organizations and aspiring social enterprises that we at Alfanar support to become financially sustainable, for their thoughts on karami and dignity. To note, the organizations we invest in are working to improve education for children and economic opportunity for women living in slums, marginalized rural areas, and refugee camps. What does dignity mean to them? It means not relying on charity. It means being able to set their own agendas as organizations rather than implementing donor agendas. For the children, learning to read through the support of our Lebanese investee, the Iqra Association, meaning read in Arabic. They find dignity in learning to read after having been passed over by a broken public school system and nearly dropping out. And for the women in Burj al-Brajni, the Palestinian camp in Lebanon, where we've just invested in a women's organization that is training women in cooking and catering, and they've just put out their first line of food products that is on sale, we know that developing their skills and showing their families that they can be economically productive gives them dignity in an environment where they have been purposely stripped of it. Alfanar is the Arab world's first venture philanthropy organization, and we work with innovative social purpose organizations that exhibit a thirst to scale their social impact while working towards financial independence, and we try to help them achieve both. I'd like to just share 5 lessons, this is not exhaustive, that we've learned over the last 10 years of working to improve lives, achieve human dignity, and harness human ingenuity in the region. First, be relevant and sensitive within your context. We work in Arabic. This may seem very obvious, but there are so many organizations that expect you to write your proposal in English, to discuss your aspirations in English, to discuss your revenue model in another language. It is critical, not only from a dignity perspective, but also to finding the unusual suspects, the grassroots organizations that are highly relevant in their communities, to finding them if you operate in their language. Secondly, provide a package of support to investees, and you've already alluded to that, Usama. Grant funding is often necessary to seed new ideas in imperfect markets especially, but it isn't sufficient for growth or success. We provide management guidance, which we find is the glue to venture philanthropy, the sort of unsexy work about theory of change and business planning and financial management that help these organizations really clearly set towards their goals. And then we try and facilitate support for them through networks of pro bono, typically experts from the private sector who can help them along their journey in issues that we're not necessarily experts in. Third, I would say, take your time. We are invested for 3 to 5 years and sometimes longer because it takes time to build capacity. A training does not equate with building capacity, but rather working on the ground to solve problems and face challenges in real time is when we see that organizations have actually gained maturity and grown. Fourth, sustainability, financial sustainability in particular, must be central to the grant-making or investment process. As we see it, the goal of helping social purpose organizations across the Arab region achieve financial independence is directly linked to dignity. Because once an organization is able to recover 40, 60, hopefully 100% of its costs over time, it is that much more confident and able to stay focused on its mission. It is that much freer to set the course most suitable for the communities it serves. It is that much more able to scale and be innovative. And eventually, our hope is that sustainable, scalable organizations will be able to hold their governments to account, hold the private sector to account, the media. And this is really critical to the development of a vibrant civil society across the Arab world. Finally, exit, please, should not be an event from one day to the next. It's a process that should be managed together and with clear expected targets and milestones. So very quickly, to give you a story of hope from the ground, I'd like to discuss a small grassroots organization called the Future Lights for Development organization in Cairo. They approached us in 2007 with a crazy idea to set up the first Montessori-style daycare center in the slums of Cairo. Well, we found them because they don't speak English, they speak Arabic, and they came to us and they could relay their passion in an unfiltered way. And as a venture philanthropy organization, knowing the returns on investment in early childhood education, we took a risk and seeded the investment. Today, enrollment in the first school has grown by 125%, and last year they broke even. We are preparing, yes, great. We are preparing to exit this part of the investment because they've achieved sustainability in it. It took a grant to see that innovation and many years of working together. But now we can celebrate exit together because it represents a shared success. That's only the beginning, of course, because Future Lights doesn't want to stop at one school. And so what they've developed is a holistic training program where they go into the slums of Cairo and they work with existing daycare centers, usually attached to the mosque or the church. It's essentially a garage for children. There's no curriculum. And they work with the principals, the teachers, the assistants, and the parents to educate them and train them, not only on the Montessori curriculum, but on hygiene, on health, on nutrition, on how to manage a daycare center. And at this point in time, they've now trained 29 schools. Over 3,500 children in the slums have access to high quality preschool education. And what we're looking towards next is how to scale this to other governorates, hopefully even to other countries in the region. I know my time is up, and I'd love to give you examples from the women's economic empowerment investments, but instead I'll leave you maybe with a question or a thought to spur on further discussion. What seems to me is the missing puzzle, and not one that we at Alfanar deal with directly, but when an organization like Future Lights achieves large-scale financial independence and is radically, inshallah, hopefully, transforming early childhood education for millions of Egyptian children, is that enough? Is our job finished there? Or is there an imperative to find a way to ensure that these grassroots innovators impact policy in Egypt and beyond, that they revolutionize educational policy and the opportunities for generations to come? And I would argue we should figure out ways to do that together.
Thank you. We've touched a little bit throughout this discussion on international models, on the desire of the international community to be more engaged in the Middle East, but we all know that it faces challenges. And sometimes there's a fear of getting involved because the contexts are difficult and politically fraught. There have been situations in Egypt, in fact, in which it's been criminalized for international agencies to be involved in the transitions that were happening right now. So I'd love to hear from both of you, just very briefly, about advice that you would have to international philanthropy partners and others who would really like to engage in social transformation in the region. Either of you.
I think that there's a great need for us to partner together to build on the successes and the lessons learned and the challenges of local organizations. And I think that there are a fair amount of us operating, but there certainly aren't enough. And I think that if we can see one another as part of a value-creating ecosystem, and we can attract more philanthropists, not just big donor agencies, because that does exist in the Arab region, but philanthropists from across the globe to piggyback on or help support the next stage. I mean, essentially what I was discussing is maybe taking an organization to a catalytic level of impact, and that takes a level of investment, for example, that we don't have, but we could certainly partner together to get other organizations there. I think that would help revolutionize the region and also the impressions people have about the region and what's possible, and take us beyond just the headlines, which are always negative, and towards the truly heroic stories that make up the daily life of people.
I think what Myrna said originally is key. This point about, the Arabic reaching out to the people in their own language, in their own concepts, is key. So going local, meaning finding a strong local partner who will actually execute on the ground, is absolutely essential. It will help you also recover when unexpected change happens. But more importantly, to me, the big lesson learned, here, I came back to Jordan from, Silicon Valley. I did several startups in the US, was used to sort of the methodologies. And when we did our first training boot camps, I did what I knew what to do, right? I begged, borrowed, and stole material from Stanford, Columbia, other places, Berkeley, put it together in a training course and started experimenting. And my big lesson learned was, probably by the second boot camp, a couple of guys were coming through visiting Jordan from Palestine. One of them had very, very, very poor English. They were trainers, right? They trained entrepreneurship in Palestine. There's an incubator there. So I invited them. I said, I'd like you to give a session here. But, we're using this material. Most of it is in English. One of them was okay in English. The second guy was a disaster in English. So he spoke in Arabic. And his examples, the same concepts that, I'm used to in the West and so forth, localized, spoken in the local language with local examples, were probably 10 to 100 times more powerful. They stuck with the people. And all it took me was sitting through that session, watching the faces of the trainees to quickly realize, wow, this guy in 2-3 hours reached them more than I could reach them. And I think of myself as a good speaker and inspirational, all the good stuff. From days, right? And that led me immediately to sort of embark on another program to say, localize everything, change the terms. When you're building companies, I believe in the methodology of that's advocated by Jeffrey Moore. It's called Crossing the Chasm. It's his methodology for how technology companies grow and what you should watch out for. And just to give you an idea, one of the key concepts in that whole thing is he uses the beachhead strategy. Right? The beachhead comes from Normandy Beach, right? World War II, the Allies going against the Nazis in France. that means nothing to the Arabs, right? Zero. And I had to actually dig deeper into the deeper history and all of that and figure out the right analogies, right? We happened to use Tariq bin Ziyad, who did a similar thing, crossed the Straits of Gibraltar. Gibraltar comes from Jabal Tariq, Mountain of Tariq, but the British can't say that, so they called it Gibraltar. But the guy, when he crossed, he burned his ships and he told the troops, either you go forth or you die. And that actually fits very much that whole strategy that's being taught on the beachhead, right? So when you teach it in those terms, they can relate to it, they can understand it, you can refer back to it and say, this is it, your whole company, you're betting on one thing. So those, those examples kept hitting again and again, and that's the importance of sort of having the strong local partners who really understand the culture, the nuances, the weirdnesses, all that stuff.
As you two are speaking, it struck me that both the founder of Alfanar and also, Usama, your work with Oasis 500 are global Arabs, people who've spent some time in diaspora but are very committed to the region. And I think it suggests to us that also diaspora Arabs who want to get more involved and are looking for a way to do so would be another channel by which we could make some of this good energy and investment happen. The other that occurs to me is indigenous philanthropy. Because if as an international agency you're not quite ready to jump in and do work directly on children or women or whatever the field is, finding your counterpart in the Arab world that are getting their feet on the ground, trying to figure out what to do, sharing experience, perhaps co-funding, could be another way that we make sure this is a sustained effort going forward. A friend of mine who writes about transitions just currently finished a study of about 90 democratic transitions around the world. And he wrote a book called Understanding Tahrir, which is a very hopeful message, I think, for those of us in the midst of the Arab transitions, in which he noted that it really takes about a decade to know what the destination of some of these transitions are going to be. But along the way, you can shorten that learning curve, you can move forward the transitions if there are these kinds of partnerships and reaching out across borders and boundaries and genders and disciplines, as both of you so well represent. We were told that as the dinner event, there would be no audience participation. We're not particularly happy about that. We're not sure if it's because there's wine on your tables and they were afraid about what kind of participation it would be. But talk to the organizers if you're not happy about that. And particularly, I hope that you'll seek out our panelists to discuss further some of the ideas that they've presented tonight. I want to thank them very much. It's not always easy to follow up that universal eloquence of music, but I think that our panelists today really did succeed in using words to paint pictures that are both hopeful and give us all pathways that we can move forward on together. So thank you all for staying and listening, and thank you to our panelists.